everyone, and welcome to Build Different, Kahua's podcast that is focused on awesome stories from the industry, including awesome people from the industry. And today we have no shortage of that. This week is Construction Safety Week, if you're listening to this live and during the week that it came out. Also, it's Mental Health Awareness Month in May. So a couple of really big topics, and we are going to go after those topics as best we can. To do that, we've invited some experts in the industry to share their thoughts on both construction safety and construction safety mental health. So, first and foremost, let's meet our panel. Stephanie, will you go first?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, AJ. My name is Stephanie Lemick. I am the founder and CEO of an organization called The Wounded Workforce. We're focused on workplace mental health advocacy and helping build trauma-informed workplaces. Before I founded The Wounded Workforce, I spent 2 decades in in-house HR. So I'm a former HR executive, and 10 of those years I actually spent in the construction industry, so directly supporting construction. And I am so thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about construction mental health because it's something that's near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Stephanie. And Carrie.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Thanks for having me. My name is Carrie Hunter. I am Vice President of Business Development for Job Site Care. We do concierge healthcare for job sites. So whether that's your injury, illness, or mental health, we are covering the whole kit and caboodle. It's not just you fall and break your leg, it's everything, including mental health. So I'm very excited to be in this conversation. I've spent the last also 2 decades in and out of construction, and the last decade specifically in construction tech. I recently moved over to healthcare, and I am super excited about being able to continue to work with construction teams all over the U.S., but now taking care of them in a different way, not just the fun, cool tech stuff, but able to take care of them individually on job sites. So I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Carrie. And then Ian.
All right. I should have brought my own walk-off music, I think. So yeah, stoked to be here. Honored to be, amongst the panelists here. A little bit about me. So have a different type of background. I've got experience in construction and construction tech. So as you can imagine, working with countless teams, I've seen firsthand how cognitive chaos, mental health challenges, mental fitness, I've seen how it all directly impacts a lot of projects, a lot of businesses, more importantly, a lot of lives, from safety incidents to project timelines, the list goes on and on. So yeah, I'm stoked to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. And my name's AJ Waters. I'll be moderating and hopefully participating a little bit today. I also have a couple of decades now in construction, which is hard to fathom at times, but my kids like to remind me that I am in fact old. And so we'll go ahead and we'll dive right in. First and foremost, this question, I'm going to ask it to each of you, and we'll just continue with the order that we went for intros. So Stephanie, Carrie, and then Ian. But as we jump around, we may kind of move side to side. What inspired you to become an advocate for mental health? So like Stephanie, for example, you worked in HR and construction for a while. Yeah. What inspired you to become an advocate for mental health in either your organization or to start the Wounded Workforce?
Absolutely. It's a great question. I kind of say there's a twofold answer. I think there's a very personal answer, and then I think there is that, answer of someone who is a business person wearing that people leader hat. And the personal story is, like many people, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it was a lot. We were navigating collective trauma. A lot of us, were experiencing some pretty extreme things. And, during that period of time, I was navigating my own mental health challenges that I'd actually had for many years and trying to find ways to better approach and navigate that. And something I recognized was how that was showing up for me at work without me recognizing that. It's pretty wild. An HR executive with decades of experience even has a hard time recognizing how mental health challenges can impact their work, the workplace. it's probably something that really impacts so many of us. So that's really the catalyst for that bigger picture of how do we actually make it easier and more accessible for workplaces to navigate mental health challenges, whether they are diagnoses like depression, anxiety, or if they're, just those really challenging moments that we all have come up in our lives. How do we do a better job of addressing that? And for me, having spent so much time in HR, how do we tackle that at a systemic and cultural level instead of putting all of that extra work on managers and leaders?
And so, like, there was a lot there, but what is it? I mean, you mentioned COVID as like a starting point with this too.
Yeah.
What is it about now that makes this so critical? Like, why now?
Yeah, I think it's like this really kind of critical mass moment in our society. I think almost everyone can describe that they've had a changed relationship with work following the COVID-19 pandemic. For many people, they also have a changed relationship with their own mental health. So I think that moment overall, looking at our workplaces, our culture as a society is really impactful. But the other thing, and this is an exciting thing, and I'm sure the construction industry is excited to see Gen Z entering the workplace. Well, Gen Z has a really interesting perspective on mental health and well-being, especially as it relates to the workplace as well. And so I think these two things kind of happening at the same time, they are that critical mass. And the statistics I always roll out when I talk about Gen Z and mental health, it's one from a survey Monster.com did about 2 years ago now. They surveyed Gen Z new grads, and 92% of them said they wanted to be able to talk about mental health at work. Wow. So this really is we've had this collective changed experience, and that means something different for everyone. But we also have this huge push of Gen Z that will be quickly overtaking the employee population we see in our workplaces. We've got to make the change as it relates to talking to mental health as a business necessity. But then there's also that element of it's the right thing to do.
Right. So, Carrie, what about you? What inspired you to become an advocate for mental health?
Well, it's funny. I have kind of a different story than Stephanie. So I, last year when I decided to make the change from tech, being really, deep in the tech portion of the construction industry, moving over to healthcare, I was really inspired by the thought of being able to help people in the industry and being able to support workers on job sites. It really meant something to me. It was really moving me more than tech. Like I said, tech is really cool and it's fun, and it's just fun to bring new technology to job sites, but I really was like striving for something more. And I have very personal connections to mental health and suicide. I have a lot of it in my family. And so for many years, I have been an advocate for mental health, just taking care of our mental health and being able to talk about suicide and being able to talk about things that are bringing us down. I wasn't as affected as Stephanie mentioned about COVID, as just moving onto the healthcare side, understanding some of the stats that I never paid attention to, or that just that it's the highest industry, the highest for suicide rates. I mean, things like that just bubble it up to the surface for me more, just because I do have such familiarity with it in my family and to people very close to me, friends, that I've gone through this. So I feel really personally connected to it and just want to make it more of a common conversation so that it's not this scary thing that's looked upon negatively, but rather a conversation that we're all just having. Everybody has different stuff. I always say a little edited version there, but different stuff for different people, and everybody's got that stuff. So it just is, it looks different for each person. So making it more common and normal for us to be talking about it. I do think Stephanie's right. The Gen Z coming out, they're more open and they've been through some unique experiences that have probably pushed them into that bracket, but it's more, for me, it's more personal. It comes from more of my family and friend background, that why I'm so invested in it. But just switching from tech to healthcare, just seeing the stats is crazy. It's just astounding. Like we need to be talking about it. We need to be doing something better.
Right. And Ian, safety on the job site has been such it's been a focus point for a long time. It's been a very important topic. But lately, the shift has started to move toward mental health a little bit. What was it that kind of got you to make that shift? Because for a long time, a lot of the stuff that I saw from you was very safety focused, right? But now you're starting to slide. What had you kind of become more of an advocate for mental health along with safety?
Well, AJ, I mean, I think I've always been an advocate. Maybe I'm not as vocal, and maybe that's a perfect example of an industry that deeply cares about its people, but may not have the courage to be vocal about it, may not even know how to be vocal about it. And I think that's where we need to start. But for me personally, back before I got into construction technology, I was seeing how this was playing out every single day. I've got countless stories, and I bet every one of your listeners has a story that sounds like any of mine might sound. But I was working in an environment. Are you all familiar with the term VUCA? VUCA? Okay, it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I mean, nobody would disagree that every single construction job is a VUCA environment, and so that's an environment where a millisecond decision can actually have a life or death consequence. And I was part of that. I've seen it happen personally to me. I've seen it happen to friends. Everybody has a war story, so to speak, where it happened to somebody. And you just get to a point, AJ, where mental toughness is just not optional anymore. Right. And, we talk about it, we see all the stats and they strike home, but it's not just about fixing or being aware of broken minds, right? It's about how do we build unstoppable minds so that when we are operating in a VUCA environment, we're best set up to handle the stresses. We're best set up to communicate to our teams in an effective way if they're struggling. And I think it starts there, right, with the communication. But yeah, that's how, I kind of landed into this, and that's what really inspired my journey.
Well, so let's pull on that thread a little bit, Ian. So you mentioned that a millisecond can make or break and be life or death on a job site. And mental health greatly impacts that millisecond. Like if you're not all the way up there and that decision's delayed, have you seen, or do you have an example of where, maybe keeping the names innocent, where kind of something with mental health or team dynamics got in the way and caused some sort of delay or catastrophe on a project?
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen countless, right? There is a hospital build project that I'm somewhat familiar. I was hearing this from people that I didn't work with directly, but that told me the story. And I'll try to change the names to keep everybody in the shadow, so to speak. But it was a mechanical contractor. And they had some critical lifts and some critical time sensitive activities and tasks that they needed to get complete. And one of the foremen there, was going through some personal stuff, bringing in some heavy baggage to work every single day. And people started seeing some of the signs, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the signs and later on in the podcast here. But not being really present, being snippety, being short with everybody, and just started making small micro decisions that weren't really that good, and those kind of accelerate, right? They snowball into bigger issues, and so what happened was the team they made some bad decisions. They installed some things incorrectly, and there was a ton of schedule delays, a lot of rework associated with it. I think it was maybe $250,000 worth of rework in this particular case. And this guy, he was not a bad foreman. He's got maybe 15, 20 years of experience under his belt, but his cognitive bandwidth was just wiped out. And everybody deals with that. Everybody sees that. And so not only is there a financial implication to the projects, but let me ask you all, would you rather work with somebody or work alongside somebody who is coming to work, maybe operating at 20, 25% of their cognitive bandwidth because they got so much, as Carrie put it, stuff that they're dealing with? Would you rather work with someone like that who is perfectly trained in all the safety protocols? Or would you rather somebody who has gone through the safety protocols, maybe, it's been a while, but they're sharp as a tack, right? And they have, mental fitness about them. I would opt for the latter, not the former, right? So it just kind of shows you that your mental state is actually the ultimate leading indicator for all things related to safety, right?
And I think
Yeah.
that also like kind of spreads throughout the team too. So if you've got this incredible foreman, but you know they're going through a bunch of stuff and they're not quite there, then you start questioning their decisions. You start questioning, is this the, it then kind of is insidious and kind of spreads throughout the team. And then you've got more than one person that's stressed on the job, that's worrying about things that maybe aren't even in their wheelhouse. They shouldn't even be worrying about, but it's now almost impossible. It kind of just, like I said, just kind of spreads through the team.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think about how much work, how much investment, time, money, resources we've put into safety over the course of the last few decades in construction, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But exactly to Ian, your point, Carrie, your point, construction jobs are really stressful. That is something when we look at the mental health crisis in construction, certainly there's a lot of things we can point to related to demographics and some other things. But one of the main challenges is the stress related to the jobs. And so, Ian, I love what you say kind of about that proactive. How do we actually get all of the folks on our jobs the tools, the resources, the understanding to see how important that mental well-being or mental fitness is to make sure, we're able to operate in that best case scenario. Because certainly there are things that, the stuff that comes up in our lives, the things that happen that may be happening outside of work, impacting how we're showing up and our mental well-being in the workplace or on the job site. There's stuff that's happening actually on the job site that's incredibly challenging. When we look at the stress around quality, scheduling, lack of staffing, when we look at potential loneliness, which is a huge impact when it comes to mental health and mental well-being overall. Construction, whether it's because you are off building something away from your friends and family, which I know is very common, or if it's just you are working such long days or such difficult hours that by the time you come home, your kids are already tucked into bed. Those have real impacts. And I think that's part of it, is how we look at those specific challenges that are unique to the industry and really get thoughtful about how we proactively support folks to address that, because it is an extension of safety in a really significant way. It's also an extension of productivity, quality, profitability, all those things that are so important and that all of you are investing so much time and effort into enhancing.
It's funny. I'm reminded of the candy bar commercial, right, where they're like, you got the weird actor and they're being all strange, and the tagline is "You're not yourself when you're hungry," right? The same is true when you're stressed, right? It's the exact same thing. You kind of have that short fuse, or there are signs that kind of point to this. So, Stephanie, from your experience, then, like, when we see these signs popping up, what are some things that we could do? Like, are there strategies that we as individuals could do to care about those around us in a positive way?
I mean, I think you already said it in your question. I think that care is really what it's about. And I think, sometimes I think when we get into these conversations about mental health, we overcomplicate things sometimes. And don't get me wrong, mental health, neuroscience, which is at the heart of mental health, is really complicated. And then when we look at what we've been facing as it relates to the epidemic of suicide in the construction industry, when we look at opioid overdoses, overdose deaths in the industry, those are pretty serious things that require some really serious intervention. But the thing is, we can't only focus on crises like that. And I think when we focus on crises, we make it so intimidating for folks to feel like they have the power, the tools, the resources to actually help. And the thing is, what it takes to actually help is something I see all the time on job sites. And I'm guessing our listeners will absolutely be able to relate to this. It's really caring personally about the people you're working with. You spend so many hours in a day with your team, with your crew. Think about it. You get to know them fairly well, and you can tell when something is off. That's the thing. When we talk about, some of those flags that someone may be experiencing a mental health challenge or crisis, relationship challenges, showing up late, that lack of motivation, relationship challenges is someone, yelling at everyone, and normally they're the nicest person around. The key is you notice when someone is a little not themselves. You're like, oh, Stephanie, you don't seem quite like yourself. And it's as simple as connecting with that person on that personal level and expressing that genuine care and say, hey, Stephanie, I'd love to grab lunch with you. You seem a little off. Or, hey, Stephanie, is everything okay? I'm here for you if you need anything. And then that's what becomes so important when we look at some of the work many of the amazing nonprofits working around construction mental health are doing in making sure as a follow-up to those conversations, those connections, that's like kind of first intervention. And then you don't have to have all the answers. There's tons of resources, your internal HR team, your leadership team. There are resources like 988. There is the Construction Suicide Prevention Hotline. There are, Sober Sidekick is a free app for people who are exploring sobriety and additional peer support around that. There is a whole host of amazing free resources that you can connect someone to. And if anyone is ever looking for them, there's tons of places you can find them, but there is a free download on my website. I don't want your email. I don't want anything. I just want you to grab those resources and have them, because that's the key, is caring deeply and then making those connections. I will add, though, if someone is experiencing crisis, tap in that help, that support right away. If you are truly afraid for someone's physical well-being or the physical well-being of those around you, it is okay and it is the right thing to do to call 911 to immediately intervene. And if you can, just, make sure and offer that it is a mental health crisis that someone is experiencing to hopefully get the right support as part of that. Hopefully we're not getting to that point, but also know it's okay if that's the situation, to make sure we're intervening to ensure physical safety first and foremost.
Stephanie, what you're saying about care, kind of going back to what you're saying about care, is so spot on, though, because, for example, our medics and our MDs are available for job sites and for people, but one of the things that they do in the mental health portion of our program is really teach and encourage the peer-to-peer support. Yeah. It is crucial. That piece is so crucial to just getting people, again, talking about, like, hey, Joe, like, what's going on? You're like, like you said, you're yelling at everybody, and normally you're the nicest guy ever. Just saying, how you doing today? Like, so that others, your peers, know, hey, somebody notices that something's different and cares to find out what's going on or just how you're doing that day. That is such a crucial piece. And I think, we oftentimes think, oh, it has to be this huge crisis, and it's not always that. In fact, there are many, 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 many chances before something is a crisis where there were opportunities or are opportunities for us to connect on a peer level that is really just about expressing care and showing someone, hey, I care about what's going on with you. I care about how you're feeling. I've felt the same ways, or, like just even having the commonality of shared experiences, or like, oh, like my hours were crazy too, or my kids are going nuts, or whatever that is, that just shows that level of care. It is such a big deal. And I think oftentimes people like get spooked by the idea of, oh, it's got to be like this crisis and something really terrible is happening and I've got to do something magical. And it's not even that. It's just connecting with your coworkers and workers on site and your peers, just to say, hey, what's going on? I see something different.
Absolutely. It is. It is. And I think that's the big thing. And we want to get to the point where we're preventing crises. And that's the key. And I also think, from the lens of being a former HR leader, thinking about executives, folks who may be, support staff, they're not on a project all the time. If you're wondering, well, how do I tap in? I'm not seeing someone every day. Do not tell me you do not have at least one or two superintendents on your job who knows everyone's business, okay? Like, I know this is true. Like, connect with those people. It's funny, but that's the thing is I think, obviously we want to tackle this really big challenge, this really big problem in the industry, but let's start by harnessing what's already happening on every job I've ever been to, and it is deep, meaningful connections of the people doing that work. Let's take that and use that as the catalyst to get people connected to those resources that can help them and hopefully prevent crises, or, in a worst case scenario, connect people to that help to make that crisis have a better outcome, because that is possible and we've seen that impact.
So, Ian, I'm going to ask you a leading question. And hopefully you remember this, because we were having actually a conversation about this morning. Because care, we use the word care a lot in what to do when the signs come up. And like, it's easy for us to care about our friends or our coworkers that are right next to us. But how do we get executives to care about this topic, right? And for the longest time, we were always able to measure safety KPIs. Right? We know the recordable, the reportable. We know our safety KPIs. But it's super hard to measure effective mental health programs. It's super hard to measure ROI for mental health. So Ian, what's a different way to reframe mental health metrics?
And that's the $1 million question, right? And taking a step back, when we talk about people caring, I don't doubt that every single person actually does care. I think one of the challenges in the industry is, to everybody's point already, is we're aware. Everybody is aware of the challenges, but we don't know what to do. We're not trained mental, illness practitioners. We're not trained mental health practitioners. Where do we go? What do we do? How can we incorporate that in a day-to-day, in our day-to-day operations in our business? As far as putting some sort of KPI around initiatives to help do this, I wish I had the answer for that. You could always do, check-ins during your safety talks, talking about leading indicators. Do we have any sort of, mental health or, mental fitness assessments that we can do? And there are a number of them out there in the industry. I can send some over after the call if you want. But you could start incorporating those and just, kind of doing those check-ins to see where people are at. As far as the ROI goes, you don't have to dig very deep to see where the potential ROI might be. I hate connecting mental health initiatives to the concept of ROI, but, we do live in a world where that is important, especially with such margin compressed industries as construction, but like I said, you don't have to scratch the surface far to see, hey, someone who's being compromised cognitively on a job site, there's a higher likelihood of an incident or worse, right? There's a higher likelihood of mistakes. The thing that everybody's talking about is retention and attracting new talent. If you're living and working in an environment that is not investing either time, energy, money, or all of the above into mental fitness and mental health initiatives, how the heck are you going to attract Gen Z, as Stephanie put it? How are you going to keep the people, in our generation who, may be a little bullish when it comes to mental health and sharing our feelings, but, it does matter to us too, so, I mean, KPIs, ROI, it's all there. You don't have to scratch very, very, deep into the surface to find that.
Yeah, and I think that like that retention one is a big one, and that was the one that I was hoping that you'd kind of get to from this morning because, like you said, that we're in a labor shortage as is. We're trying to attract new talent, and here we are pushing people away with this high stress, overwork environment that they're kind of stuck in. So, Carrie, let me ask you then, what's the delineation between like our personal accountability and the role of leadership in mental health? Like how does that kind of stack up?
Well, I think that, we talk about peer-to-peer support, we talk about caring. The other piece of that is that's on your same level with the same folks that are, in the same roles or, at the same level. But as far as leadership goes, I think one of the things that's become really, really obvious is we need leadership to be willing to be vulnerable, to be willing to go out on a limb and talk about these things, and to be very clear in, not just talking the talk. Everybody can say, oh, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing that. But when that falls empty, when there's no action behind it, it really falls on deaf ears because nobody believes what you're saying. So I think for leadership, the task is, and this may stress some people out, but the task is really being vulnerable personally, regardless of status of who you're talking to, whether it's, the lowest level employee at the company or somebody in the C-suite that you're chatting with. The task for the leadership of these companies is really to get vulnerable and be willing to talk about it and be willing to make it a priority. Because if the leadership can't do that, then how do we expect the workers to do it? It will just continue a really vicious cycle of nothing happening or negative things happening. So I think the biggest, it's a relatively simple takeaway as far as just, you don't have to do these 15 things, but it's a very personally difficult thing for many people just to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I'm going through this, or I went through this, or I've experienced this, or just being willing to then say, hey, we know that you guys are going through this or these things, and we want to be a resource for you. We want you to come to us. It's not going to harm you or your job status to come to us when there's a crisis or an issue, or when you're feeling like that's coming on. Like I said earlier, typically there's some buildup to these things. It's not just like one thing and then boom, everything falls apart. It's usually there's quite a few buildups to this. So I think just being vulnerable and being willing to, how can we expect our employees to be vulnerable and come to us if we can't be vulnerable and open, and just making that very clear, and then putting the action behind the words, whether that's a program on the job site or whether that's a program within HR, like Stephanie mentioned earlier. I think that's the biggest key here.
Can I jump in and talk a little bit about, I love this question so much, AJ, around personal accountability and organizational accountability, because I think there's this interesting tension. And I would say as a society, we tend to, especially when it relates to health, because mental health is much like physical health, it's about our own personal health experience. We tend to focus really heavily on individual action. And there's probably a whole hour-long conversation we could have around that push toward individual action. And I think because of that, there's been a lot of focus around individual action for mental health. I think that's fabulous. I think that needs to keep happening. There are some things that are really important, though, when we look at individual action and mental health. Number one is the state of mental health access the access to care, specifically, especially in the United States, is incredibly challenging. And then when you layer on different demographics, so if you layer on a male or a non-white male looking for access to a therapist, it becomes increasingly difficult for someone to find someone who is the right fit for them to talk to. So we have this challenging access to care that's kind of a big systemic issue that we're facing that exists in our environment that I think gets in the way of kind of that individual action piece. Another aspect is kind of going back to the job and going back to some of those things about the work that makes it incredibly challenging and has a direct impact on people's mental health and well-being. And, we can talk very deeply about some of the specifics in construction, but when we look even just generally overall at the workplace, we've seen a few things kind of come up over the last few years. For example, burnout, its official definition is now rooted in the fact that it is a workplace mental health challenge. It is based on the state of your work, and the workplace is the main culprit in people experiencing burnout. And then we look at some of the statistics. I had to look it up to double check because it's been a couple years and I still can't believe it. But according to 69% of people, their managers had the greatest impact on their mental health. And that was more of an impact than their doctor, which was 51%, their therapist, that was 41%, and it's the same as a spouse or a partner. So when we think about, obviously burnout, that statistic I shared, that is looking at mental health kind of across any industry or workplace. When we think about construction, I think there is truly, it is not just a moral imperative, but there's a real business case too around the way the workplace is experienced, having an impact on individuals' mental health. And then when I think we get back to the point that, each of us has made, that we need to pull this away from, this focus or this idea that folks need to be mental health care professionals. We don't want that. What we need to do is really dial into the culture, the processes, the systems, the programs that are inherent to our workplace. And that really can scaffold a workplace that is mentally healthy without adding burden to other employees and potentially straining their own mental health load as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, Ian, I'm going to ask you this one too, because you brought up bullish, and then Stephanie mentioned how much harder it is for male. Mm-hmm. Are we past the point of feelings are too touchy-feely for me? Like, have we moved beyond that? Can we say it's okay to talk about our feelings?
You and I can.
Right? As an industry,
like,
can we get past it? Yeah.
No, I don't think we're there. I really don't. I'll give you a perfect example. I'm not going to get too personal, but there was a point in my life where I was struggling, and I had two bosses or two leaders that I worked very intimately with in different regards, and loved them both. But one of them kept asking me, how you doing today? And it initially put me on the defensive, and I felt like I needed to kind of wall up. And I was like, everything's fine, I'm doing good, and I would move on. And then I had another one who was, one of my mentors, who would pull me aside. Maybe we'd go get a cup of coffee, and he would ask the exact same question, but phrased a little differently. And he would ask me, what's your bandwidth like? What's on your plate? And I think Carrie mentioned it earlier, what's going on? And it was just like a small little tweak in how the same question was being asked. And maybe I didn't get into talking about my feelings, but I got into talking about all the quote unquote root causes for, a lot of the struggles that I was going through. I would like to say that the industry, we can get past this, quote unquote tough guy mentality, and the stigma. I'm not seeing it. I still see it out there. And, to the point of what's causing this, looking at the work, the stress is not going to go away. The pressures on the job, they're not going to get any lighter. In fact, we're seeing it's getting harder. I would argue there's probably not many people out there that are saying that construction is getting easier.
Right.
And that's why once again I'm betting chips on going through mental fitness training and teaching people not to avoid the work because the work's going to stay the same, but how do we become strengthened and emboldened to be able to handle the stressors a lot better so that we are able to carry that cognitive chaos, as we put it, into making good decisions, how it impacts, mental health, and talking about that kind of stuff where we're kind of circumventing the stigma, so to speak. Because, like I just said, I think that we should be past that where we can talk about our feelings, but there's just so many people who still think that it's the soft skill, fluffy, woo-woo stuff that we're dealing with. I think that's just the reality of it.
So, yeah, I think you're exactly right. It'll still be a while before we get past that mentality, but phrasing the question in a different way can often bring down the barriers. And so if you're having trouble with that as a leader or as a manager, maybe that's a trick that you try is let's rephrase that question. All right. We got a little bit of time left. I got 2 rapid fire questions for each of you. So I'm gonna go off pretty quick on these. First one, and I'm gonna go from left to right on my screen based on where you're at. So sorry, Carrie, you're stuck first again. So first one, what is your favorite tool or technology for someone who's looking for help with their mental health? It could be an app, a website, a phone number. What's your one favorite thing?
I'm a little biased because I'm really deep in it, but I would say that my company and our service for our job sites is my best. It is the best because I know it gives direct access to folks, to MDs, to medics, to people that are trained, that are MHFA certified, that are trained in this. So I would say for me, it's jobs. Again, I'm a little biased because I'm deep in it. But I know what we're doing on job sites to help folks, and I know we're really involved. So I would say that's my number one. Obviously, there's many, many, many different things out there, but I'd say that was my number one.
All right, Stephanie, what's your number one go-to?
All right, this one is so easy, and that's why I love it. And it's going to be a 2-for-1 special. I apologize. But 2 things that anyone can do anywhere and really help kind of just settle their emotions, their nervous systems. And remember, anger is an emotion, so can kind of help you with that as well. It's box breathing and the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding method. You can Google those, but basically they are these really simple things that you can do yourself. Box breathing, I love for you to do individually. It's really focused on that connection to the breath to bring you back down. And then that 5-4-3-2-1 grounding is excellent for yourself, but it also can be really helpful if someone is having a hard time, maybe experiencing a panic attack, having a challenge, and you're trying to kind of get them connected quickly back to where they are. Super great, easy resources. You don't need anything. Only takes a couple minutes. So those are my 2 favorites, go-tos. I share them anytime I do a training.
All right. And Ian?
We did not plan appropriately. So I sell technology now. I love technology for construction, but I'll be the first to tell you that the best technology or the best thing that you could do, Stephanie, you stole mine. It's the box breath, right?
Yep.
Or, I call it the 6 count breath reset.
Yeah.
And, there are different variations you can get online. You can look at them. Here's a good one we could all do right now where we, breathe in through the nose for 4 seconds, hold it, and then exhale through the mouth for 6 seconds. And you know what this is going to do? It slows your heart rate down. It lowers your cortisol. Maybe not if you've had 8 cold brews like I have today, but enough to make some good decisions. It signals the vagus nerve to shift you away from fight or flight. And, that's what I believe to be a root cause for a lot of this is the fact that we are once again in a fight or flight situation all the time. Getting super scientific, it actually re-engages your prefrontal cortex. And so for all the science nerds out there, you'll know that that's where a lot of your decision making is happening in your brain. So yes, a breath, it's free. It's higher tech than anything you could do, right? There's nothing higher tech than the human body. And it freaking works, and I would challenge your audience here, do it for a week and then right back to Kahua, to AJ, Let us know what you think. The other thing that I would throw in there, and this is once again is a free thing you can do. Navy SEALs do this, right? A lot of elite athletes do this, right? All your elite performers that you would think of are doing something similar to this, and it's called a tactical pause. Okay, and the idea is that we're bombarded with stimuli constantly. How do we pause? Whether it's 30 seconds, 60 seconds, put a pause in there, take a few deep breaths, box breath or what have you. And then after you've interrupted that stress response loop, get into making that decision. And what you're going to see is it's going to reduce your emotional reactivity. And going back to the idea of those micro decisions in milliseconds time, if you are able to incorporate a little bit of a break, you're going to see the cognitive ability and the good decision making skyrocketing from there. So those are two of the lower tech, completely free, make an impact right now type things that you can do. And then, of course, there are tons of resources like JobSite. There are a ton of apps out there as well. But I would say, the people that you have on this call, excellent resources. So, yeah.
All right. Second question. We're going to do this one even faster. And it's going to be hard. So, good luck. And we're going to go in opposite order. So, Ian, you get to go first. 5 years from now, where would you like to see the industry with mental health?
Whew. So fast, huh? Fast version.
Yep, fast version.
I'd like to see us move away from just awareness and get more into action. And I think any toolbox talk, any safety meeting, any project meetings, I would like to see a mental fitness or, a cognitive chaos type discussion point in the meeting, right? Where it's built in as we're going through these critical coordination efforts, as we're doing these critical picks, any sort of high risk, high probability of, severe incident type activity out there. Incorporating a quick mental check-in, how's everybody doing, with their bandwidth and what's going on in their plates, and what are we walking into these situations with? I'd like to see that be part of every single pre-task plan and things like that.
I like it. Stephanie, 5 years
I
from
love
now.
it. All right, so I want us to be talking about mental health the way we talk about physical health, and maybe we're just talking about health, and that is everyone has mental health, and shifting that language so we've removed stigma, and it's really something that we are talking about holistically, recognizing that versus, that focus on challenges or crises. And then second, I want the industry to be so proficient in understanding how mental health, mental well-being, mental fitness impacts the work, that the industry is actually a talent attractor because we've been able to leverage this in a way that really improves people's experience in the workplace, improves people's lives, and also improves organizational outcomes. Is it a stretch? Absolutely, but I do really think if there's an industry to do it, it's construction.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that it makes us more attractive because the burnout is so much lower. Carrie, you get to take us home.
All right. I've thought about this a lot in my role and just as a person that cares about it. But in the next 3 to 5 years, I think we can actually do it much quicker than 5 years. But I would like to see every GC with an active mental health program. So as common as medical coverage, an active mental health program. I don't think that's a stretch by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's actually very doable. I'm seeing lots of GCs implementing this now, but taking an action. Yes, we want it to be part of the conversation, but I want to see action. I want to see GCs taking action and implementing these, because it's part of the, what can the executives do, from the question before. Again, taking action to say it's not just lip service. We're serious about this. We're implementing this on the job site because, again, like Ian and Stephanie said earlier, this is affecting how productive our teams are, our efficiency rates, the cost of projects. There's a whole other plethora of things it's affecting, but making our workers feel cared for and taken care of and heard and seen, it is like that is el primo. So I'm going to say, having an actual mental health program for every GC on every project site, just like regular healthcare, would be mine for sure.
AJ, can I
Love
can I
it.
add one more real quick?
Sure. Yep.
I'd also like to, only because I needed some time to think about that one. I'd also like to see a future in which we really delineate the difference between mental illness and mental health. And I think a
Yes.
lot of a lot of teams would be challenged to make that delineation. Whereas mental illness that requires, medical diagnoses, which by the way, none of this is. I think we should
Right.
probably say that too. Um, and that's a different topic altogether. And mental health is something grand that, people can take action right now, as Carrie and Stephanie have put it. But I'd like to see a future in which we kind of delineate the difference between those two.
And that's an excellent point because physical illness and physical health, like we know how to do it that way. Why don't we know how to do it with mental health? So that's a great way to end. Stephanie, go ahead.
The best tool, I'm sorry, but the best tool for that I've found is the mental health continuum. It
All
looks
right.
at mental well-being and then mental illness versus lack of mental illness. And we can have a whole conversation. I wrote an article about just exactly what you're talking about, but I agree, Ian, with what you're saying. By making mental health synonymous with mental illness, I think we've worked against ourselves in terms of sometimes reducing stigma. So I think that is an excellent point.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway for everyone listening. And whether you reference Stephanie's article or other resources, figure out how to make that delineation because there is a significant difference, and it will change how you approach the situation drastically. So, well, Stephanie, Carrie, Ian, thank you so much for today. I knew today was going to be a learning experience, and you all did not disappoint. So I really appreciate it. For our listeners, thanks for sticking with us. Be sure to tune in next month, how tech is powering the future of construction. So Kahua is going to go to the tech side a little bit next month, but not Kahua specific tech, like tech in general and what it's doing to lead to the future. So check us out there. If you're interested in continuing to learn from these awesome experts, be sure to look them up on socials. All three of them, Carrie, Stephanie, and Ian, have pretty active profiles, so check them out as well. Thank you all.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you guys.